You may have encountered individuals like myself, Jim Gage, and my companion, Tanya Gage, in the past. We are both enthusiastic conversationalists. While some people may find this trait off-putting, Tanya and I are drawn to each other because of it. Apart from Tanya's obvious physical beauty, her love for conversation was one of the things that initially attracted me to her. It's fortunate for me, although I understand it can be a turn-off for many men, as I wouldn't have had a chance with someone as stunning and appealing as Tanya otherwise. Although I don't underestimate my own appeal, it's undeniable that Tanya is more attractive than I am, surpassing the looks of 99.9% of the female population. What I discovered after our fifth date is that she is also, in my experience, the best sexual partner I've ever had. From the very first time, she was at least 20% better than anyone else I've been with, and as we grew more comfortable with each other, she surpassed him by 50%. Another aspect that made us exceptionally compatible is our shared love for post-coital conversation. In the past, I've had partners who were uncomfortable with discussing our sexual experiences or preferred silence afterward. Tanya, however, enjoys talking about her feelings and experiences, as well as hearing about mine, after sex. We typically engage in about 15 minutes of cheerful conversation after each sexual encounter. Although I was immediately captivated by Tanya when I first met her, I had no intentions of getting married. Coming from a broken home, I was skeptical about marriage and starting a family. However, after dating Tanya for about 6 months, she made it clear that if I wanted to be with her, marriage and children were non-negotiable. While I wasn't certain about loving Tanya in the traditional sense, I deeply liked her company, especially our lively conversations, and desired her intensely. Just the thought of her could arouse me. Her ultimatum of shit or get off the pot initially unsettled me. I considered it a deal-breaker and bid her farewell, which left us both emotional. However, when I saw her with another man 2 weeks later, I realized I couldn't let her go. I called her the next day and agreed to her terms, purchasing a ring and proposing to her shortly after. Throughout our courtship and after our marriage, there was a constant flow of banter between us. It wasn't idle chatter. Tanya had a wealth of opinions on various subjects and was exceptionally well-read. Her knowledge rivaled that of anyone I'd ever met. I, too, consider myself knowledgeable in certain areas and curious about almost everything, including sex. Tanya never shied away from discussing any topic, including intimate matters. Our married life began on a high note. Our honeymoon was wonderful, the apartment we rented had a stunning view, and our neighbors were enjoyable and seemed to appreciate, or at least tolerate, our chattiness. The only downside to our apartment complex was that the pool was visible from almost every unit, and whenever Tanya wore a bikini, it felt like every pair of male eyes was either fixed on her or hidden behind reflective sunglasses. I'm not typically the jealous type, but I didn't have any other bodies to admire that matched Tanya's. Even when she became pregnant with our first child, Ben, 3 years into our marriage, her body outshone that of almost any other woman who frequented the pool. Tanya and I seldom stayed home to watch TV. When we were at home, we cuddled and, of course, conversed. More often than not, we went out to various cultural events, a play, museum, free concert, and discussed them almost nonstop until the next outing. Naturally, this became less practical once we had children, but we still managed to attend cultural events more frequently than other couples in our situation, even after Ben was born. Our sex life was consistently active and satisfying. Tanya enjoyed both giving and receiving oral pleasure, could orgasm multiple times in a night if I pleased her correctly, and was open to any sexual activity I desired. While vaginal intercourse was her preference, and mine as well, we engaged in sexual activity nearly every night of the week in various positions, and twice a day on weekends, from our honeymoon until she was 8 months pregnant. The break during pregnancy was brief, lasting only about 2.5 months. Tanya's favorite sexual position, which happens to be my second favorite, is what we affectionately refer to as a JJ. A JJ stands for a Jimmy Jam, where she assumes the doggy position. I stimulate her anus with my fingers, insert a lubricated thin butt plug with a knob on the outer end into her anus, move it back and forth as she moans, and then penetrate her vagina with my penis. This sequence typically leads to at least one orgasm for her, often two. Her second orgasm usually coincides with my ejaculation as I remove the butt plug from her anus. The JJ consistently drove her wild, and the first intercourse she requested after recovering from pregnancy was a JJ. Between Ben's birth and the arrival of our second child, Susan, 2 years later, we continued to have sex at least 4 times a week, and even more if someone was babysitting Ben, reverting to our pre-child levels. The pregnancy with Susan mirrored that of Ben, with a similar brief hiatus of about 2.5 months, after which we resumed our sexual activity almost where we left off. So, by the 8th year of our marriage, we were still like newlyweds. Tanya and I appeared affectionate when we weren't conversing or engaging in sexual activity, and I believed we were the envy of most of our friends and colleagues. Indeed, I became the envy of all my male friends, as within 6 months after Susan's birth, Tanya's body resembled that of her 21-year-old self. At that time, I was truly enjoying married life. While I still didn't fully grasp the concept of romantic love, I knew I adored my children and relished being a parent. I also cherished Tanya's company, and my desire for her had not waned since the first time I laid eyes on her. To alleviate the monotony of tending to the kids and to satisfy her need for adult conversation and exchange of ideas, Tanya took on a part-time job when Susan turned 4. She worked for an executive relocation firm, assisting company executives and their families during moves across the country. Her role involved setting up temporary housing for executives and aiding in finding permanent residences. Initially, Tanya wasn't fond of her job as she found her colleagues to be less talkative and always pressed for time. However, after about 6 months, she began returning home happier, mentioning that she was now working with more sociable individuals who appreciated her efforts. Around 6 weeks after Tanya mentioned her improved work environment, I noticed a pattern on Mondays and Wednesdays where my calls to her cell phone went unanswered and were not promptly returned. Despite having no reason to doubt her fidelity, I decided to take precautionary measures by having locator apps installed on both our phones by the IT department at my workplace. Once the apps were installed, I observed a consistent pattern on Mondays and Wednesdays. My calls to her phone were sent to voicemail, and she didn't return them promptly as she had in the past. While her explanations for the delayed responses seemed plausible individually, collectively they raised suspicions in my mind. To address my suspicions, I conducted inquiries at the daycare center regarding Tanya's schedule on Mondays and Wednesdays. It appeared that she had been leaving the kids at the center for approximately 2 additional hours per week, 1 hour on each of those days, compared to previous weeks. On the next Wednesday, armed with this information, I attempted to reach Tanya during her lunch break. As expected, she didn't answer, and my call went straight to voicemail. Using the tracking app on her phone, I discovered her location, one of the temporary relocation units owned by her employer. I parked nearby and observed until around 1 p.m. when Tanya emerged from the unit, accompanied by a well-dressed man in his early 40s. They seemed jovial, exchanging playful gestures and engaging in lively conversation. They then departed in separate cars. I easily obtained the identity of the man, Jack Whitney, from Tanya's workplace. He was an executive with a Fortune 500 company, married with a teenage daughter residing in a city about 600 miles away. Applying my analytical skills, I deduced that Tanya likely possessed a key to the relocation unit Jack Whitney was using. That same evening, I discreetly examined her keychain, identified potential keys, and had duplicates made. I then replaced the originals while Tanya was occupied with the children. Despite her rendezvous with Mr. Whitney earlier that day, Tanya surprisingly initiated intimacy that evening, specifically requesting a JJ. While I hoped she had taken precautions, I was too aroused to decline. Although uncertain of my next steps regarding her affair, I decided to savor the moment, knowing it might be our last encounter. I exceeded expectations that night, providing her with 2 JJ sessions, a first in our relationship. The intensity of our encounters left her speechless, merely murmuring "wow" in response. Early Thursday morning, on a day Tanya was off work, I left her a note with a fabricated excuse but also expressed gratitude for our previous night's intimacy. I then drove to Mr. Whitney's temporary residence. After observing him leave, I used one of the keys copied from Tanya's keychain to enter the unit and familiarize myself with its layout. Following this, I underwent STD testing, with immediate results showing no issues. The remaining tests were expedited. With time off work, I secluded myself by a brook on Thursday and Friday, engaging in thorough introspection. Though the process was revealing and unsettling, it led me to a crucial realization. My introspection unveiled a sobering truth. I was rather superficial in my emotional connections, aside from my love for our children. While I lacked a conventional sense of love for Tanya or others, she fulfilled my needs as a spouse exceptionally well, save for that intangible aspect of affection. I doubted I would find someone surpassing her in bed, as our intimacy consistently ranked at the top. Moreover, she was a devoted mother, and our children adored her. Additionally, I valued the idea of a two-parent household for our kids. Reflecting on my fidelity, I acknowledged it stemmed from Tanya meeting my sexual needs perfectly, coupled with my infrequent business trips. My morality wasn't inherently superior to hers. Interestingly, I didn't view Tanya's infidelity as a reflection of my sexual performance. Her genuine responses during our encounters and her consistent pursuit of intimacy were undeniable. Curiously, I felt indifferent about the reasons behind her affair, focusing instead on fulfilling my desire for retribution without jeopardizing my relationship with our children. I aimed to satisfy my vengeful impulses while maintaining the stability of our family and continuing to fulfill my sexual desires. After reaching a resolution about my course of action, I returned home in good spirits, maintaining my usual cheerful demeanor. Tanya and I engaged in an intense lovemaking session on Friday night and another early Saturday morning. My mood was further lifted upon receiving the clean results of my STD tests. Without delay, I took action on Saturday morning after breakfast. My first step was to contact Mrs. Whitney. Mrs. Whitney, whom I addressed as Sally per her request, initially appeared pleasant during our conversation until I disclosed the purpose of my call. "Sally, I regret to inform you of some distressing news concerning both your husband, Jack, and my wife, Tanya. It's difficult to convey delicately, so I'll be direct. They've been involved in an affair for the past few weeks. Every Monday and Wednesday at noon, they rendezvous at Jack's relocation unit for an hour of intimacy." "What? Jim, are you serious?" I had the same reaction when I first discovered their affair. However, I'm certain of it. I've made my decision about how to handle it. I'm calling to ask if you'd like first-hand confirmation and, if so, what action you plan to take. There was a prolonged silence. "Are you still there?" I inquired. "Yes, I'm processing this. It's a lot to digest. If you're interested, I can provide my contact information. I'd prefer not to delay addressing their affair any longer. I intend to act on Monday. I'm willing to cover the cost of your flight and pick you up from the airport if you're on board with my plan. Please share your details with me. I won't need a plane ticket as I have my own plane and pilot's license. If I decide to proceed immediately, you can fetch me from the private terminal by 9:30 on Monday," Sally responded. "Let's keep this between us," I cautioned, aiming to avoid any misunderstanding. "I'm ex-CIA," she chuckled, lightening the mood briefly. "It seems we share common ground and goals. I'm confident we'll work well together," I remarked before providing my information and concluding our call. Within 2 hours, Sally confirmed her participation in what she referred to as ROP, expressing enthusiasm for the upcoming operation. It seemed she was indeed ex-CIA, as she approached the situation with eagerness. I was taken aback when Tanya expressed a desire for another JJ on Sunday night. Despite the uncertainty of my plan's success, I eagerly agreed to the idea of intimacy, opting for my favorite position, the wheelbarrow, instead. I engaged with fervor, pushing myself to new limits. Afterward, Tanya was left speechless, repeating "wow" numerous times before drifting off to sleep. On Monday morning, D-Day, I departed before Tanya woke, leaving a note praising her allure. As I drove to the airport to meet Sally, Tanya called, expressing a longing for our usual morning chat. Utilizing Bluetooth in my car, we conversed until I spotted Sally matching the description I was given, prompting me to end the call, much to Tanya's dismay. Upon meeting Sally, I was pleasantly surprised by her appearance, finding her younger and more muscular than anticipated. Her firm handshake left an impression, and I couldn't help but wonder about her strength compared to mine. Though Sally remained focused, she wasn't smiling, clearly driven by a purpose. After discussing the situation over breakfast, I refrained from influencing her decision, expressing a hope to avoid legal complications. During our conversation, Sally acknowledged my curiosity about her physique. I felt embarrassed, but she lightened the mood by explaining the attention she received for her muscular build. Impressed by her candor, I complimented her attractiveness, genuinely appreciating her physicality without any pretense. Sally blushed slightly. I'm financially independent, so I don't rely on Jack's income at all. Since I don't have to work and don't enjoy it, I volunteer for various activities. One of them is coaching a college crew team, where I'm quite hands-on, and another involves leading fitness classes for underprivileged high school students at my gym. It helps me stay in top physical shape, and I'll admit, I enjoy the attention my appearance gets, she explained, clearly familiar with recounting her story and taking pleasure in it. With that conversation behind us, I resumed my usual chatty demeanor as we waited outside Jack's unit around 11:15 a.m. While Sally wasn't the most talkative, understandably given the circumstances, she engaged with interest in my musings and remained friendly. We got along famously, perhaps due to our shared objectives. One question seemed to pique Sally's interest. "Sally, this might sound odd, but is Jack a talkative person?" I inquired. Sally chuckled, a rare moment of levity. "He's quite the chatterbox. Even our outgoing daughter sometimes asks for quiet time. If he's awake, he's talking." "That makes sense," I replied. Tanya is the same. The couple, or perhaps just partners in passion, arrived within minutes of each other just before noon. Tanya used her key to enter first, followed by Jack. After a tense 15-minute wait, Sally and I made our way to the door. I had already provided her with local cab company numbers in case she needed them. My final reminder to her was, "Remember, I need to take several photos before you do anything." "I won't forget," she replied tersely, her veins bulging slightly and muscles flexing. Silently, we entered the unit. The unmistakable sounds of intimacy emanated from the main bedroom, with clothing scattered about the hallway. With a mischievous grin, I gathered Tanya's clothes and stowed them in my backpack, which I had brought for this purpose. Stealthily, Sally and I crept toward the bedroom. I couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction seeing Tanya on her back with her heels on Jack's shoulders. It would have been a different story if he had been engaging her in a JJ position. Since Tanya had her eyes shut and Jack was preoccupied with Tanya's exposed breasts, they didn't notice until I had taken at least 6 candid photos. I kept snapping as Jack turned to see us, muttered an expletive, and withdrew from Tanya before ejaculating. One small relief was that Jack was wearing a condom. When Tanya saw Sally and me, she screamed. I continued taking photos as Jack awkwardly faced the camera, his now deflating member still encased in the condom, while Tanya hurriedly retreated to the headboard, attempting to cover herself with a sheet and then a pillow. I ceased snapping when I felt Sally move towards the shocked pair. I managed to capture one last image as Sally delivered a blow to Jack's groin and then another as she struck Tanya in the face. Then I left quietly, got into my car, and drove to pick up the kids from daycare. Before retrieving the kids from daycare, I disposed of Tanya's clothes from my knapsack, tearing them to shreds. I never wanted to see them again. The kids were surprised yet pleased to see me earlier than usual. We grabbed lunch at a fast food joint, an exception to our usual healthy eating habits, given the day's events. After lunch, I took the kids to my lawyer's office. It might not have been the conventional choice, but I wasn't about to leave them with Tanya in her likely distraught state or wait for a return. The kids, too young to grasp the situation, occupied themselves with toys and snacks in the attorney's conference room. My lawyer assured me that the divorce papers, citing adultery, would be ready the next day. I requested cohabitation of the house, a 50-50 asset split, equal responsibility for mortgage and child support, and joint custody. My lawyer thought it was unconventional, but I had carefully considered my options. My attorney shook her head in disbelief. I've never heard of someone seeking cohabitation while pursuing divorce, especially with adultery as the grounds. Asking for it post-divorce is even more unusual. With a determined smile, I replied, I have a unique perspective on life and have thought long and hard about this decision. I'm not sure if Tanya will agree, but it's what I want. I'd be selling myself short if I didn't try. Upon returning home around 4 p.m. with the kids, I found Tanya there, looking worse for wear. She had a black eye and visible bruises, having evidently changed into her own clothes after possibly wearing her lover's attire on her way back. It was clear she had been crying, with mascara streaks on her face and visible trembling. "I'm so sorry, Jim," Tanya began, but I cut her off with a raised hand, gesturing for silence. I dropped the knapsack containing the shredded clothes at her feet and handed her a sheet of paper I had prepared earlier. The paper outlined my terms. "Until you sign the divorce settlement I propose, I will not engage in any conversation with you except as necessary for our children. I do not want to hear any explanations, apologies, or excuses. In the divorce papers, which you will receive tomorrow, I am requesting cohabitation, with separate bedrooms, joint custody, a 50-50 split of assets and financial responsibilities for the children and house. If you agree to my terms, I will drop adultery as the reason for our divorce and resume communication. Otherwise, these are the last words I will speak to you outside of child-related matters. Since you will likely need a full-time job to meet your financial obligations, start looking immediately unless we can negotiate a reduced financial responsibility if you stay home with the kids during working hours. Also, our cohabitation agreement will prohibit either of us from bringing dates into the house. Any romantic activities must take place elsewhere, which you should already be familiar with. If there are any discussions regarding the divorce, your lawyer should communicate with mine. Your soon-to-be ex-husband, Jim." Tanya didn't have a chance to read the paper as the kids demanded her attention. Meanwhile, I headed upstairs. From there, I heard Ben asking Tanya about her appearance, noting her smeared mascara and black eye. Seeing Tanya trying to maintain a cheerful demeanor for the kids, I went into her closet, gathered her clothes, and placed them in the guest room. I then emptied her drawers and stacked them in the same room. By this time, it was around 5:30. "Kids," I called cheerfully as I returned downstairs, "let's spend some time in the backyard on the swing set. Mommy has an important letter to read, and then we'll decide if we'll dine in or out, depending on how Mommy feels." Tanya's expression was filled with fear as she looked at the paper on the kitchen table. I took the excited kids outside, and when we returned 30 minutes later, Tanya was sitting on the living room couch, tears streaming down her face. She had wiped off her mascara and covered her black eye with makeup, but her efforts were in vain as her tears caused it to smudge. She tried to compose herself as the kids approached her, sensing her distress. "So, Mommy, what's the plan?" I asked, trying to maintain a neutral tone. "Are we staying in or going out for dinner?" "Out for dinner," the kids answered in unison. With a forced smile, Tanya agreed, "Yes, let's go out for dinner." "All right, kids, let's wash up and head out," I said, guiding them to the powder room to wash their hands. Throughout the meal, I interacted with the kids as normally as possible while Tanya attempted to engage me in conversation. However, I only responded if it pertained to the children. After several unsuccessful attempts, she gave up. Back home, I played games with the kids while Tanya retreated upstairs. Her sobs echoed down as she discovered her belongings in the guest room. When it was time for the kids to sleep, Tanya, composed but visibly upset, informed them, "Daddy will tuck you in tonight. Mommy has to tidy up her new room." After putting the kids to bed and settling in the family room, I turned on the TV. Tanya entered sheepishly, expressing a desire to talk. Ignoring her, I put on my headset, drowning out any external sounds. The following morning, I received a call from my attorney, informing me that the divorce papers had been served to Tanya. Tanya herself called around noon, but I ended the conversation when it veered off topic. In the afternoon, I called Sally Whitney, and we exchanged updates. Sally apologized for the altercation with Tanya, explaining that she had lost control of her emotions. "Well, as long as you didn't land yourself in jail, we're good," I chuckled. "Sounds like you handled it like a pro. I take it the police didn't come knocking on your door." "No arrests, thankfully. Although I came close. I may have left a few marks when I tossed your wife across the room," Sally admitted. I noticed, I chuckled. Note to self, never get on your bad side. "So, what else went down?" They were both babbling excuses, "You know the drill, it didn't mean anything, I'm sorry," and all that crap cheaters say when they're caught, Sally recounted. I gave Jack a swift kick where it hurts and told him not to bother coming home. Then I took his car to the airport and flew back in my plane. Efficient operation, I'd say, I remarked. Yeah, we didn't waste any time, Sally agreed. But I'll need those photos for my divorce case. I'll email them to you right after we hang up, I assured her. We discussed our divorce proceedings, with Sally expressing surprise at my request for cohabitation. What's your game plan, Jim? How do you expect to live under the same roof? I have 2 reasons for it. Firstly, I want our kids to have both of us around. Secondly, well, let's just say I'm not ready to give up the benefits, I explained. You're an odd one, Sally chuckled. I'll be in touch once my divorce is sorted. Keep me posted, all right? Will do, I agreed. When I returned home, Tanya was still hopeful for a conversation, believing we could resolve things without a divorce. By the end of the night, she was in tears once again. I remained silent, speaking only about the kids. And so it went on. It was challenging for me to occupy my evenings alone, whether it was watching TV or going out. Tanya coped by calling friends or going out herself while I remained indifferent. We coordinated our schedules to ensure one of us was always with the kids, but exchanged no more than necessary words. You might not think that the silent treatment from one adult to another could be so impactful, but for Tanya, who thrived on conversation, it was devastating enough to drive her to seek therapy. She once asked if I could come home early for the kids, but I remained silent on the topic of her sessions, preferring to keep my headphones handy in case she attempted to discuss them. Dr. Stacy Keach, Tanya's therapist, took it upon herself to call me and express her concerns about Tanya's declining mental health. Are you intentionally trying to push her over the edge? She questioned. Has she shown you the document I want her to sign? I calmly inquired. And if so, what seems to be the issue? She doesn't want a divorce, she began, but I cut her off. And I didn't want her involved with Jack Whitney either, Dr. Keach, so it seems neither of us is getting what we want. I engaged in a lengthy conversation with Dr. Keach, revealing all the things I refrained from discussing with Tanya during my silent treatment. Some topics, such as my intention to resume sexual relations with Tanya after receiving a clean STD test result and her signing the divorce settlement, piqued her interest. Will you resume heartfelt conversations with her after sex, like before? Stacy inquired. Yes, I anticipate our sex life returning to its previous state, I replied nonchalantly. However, there was one topic I refused to entertain. I will never discuss with her how her affair with Jack started and evolved, I asserted firmly. It's a non-issue for me. As our conversation drew to a close, Dr. Keach posed a final question: would you ever consider remarrying her after the divorce? It's possible, albeit a slim possibility, I lied, eager for Tanya to sign the divorce settlement so we could resume our sexual relationship. Fast forward to a Friday evening, and upon returning home from work, I found Tanya waiting for me in a sundress, her makeup immaculate, and 2 documents in hand. Where are the kids? I inquired, addressing a child care-related matter. With my sister, for the entire weekend, if what you told Dr. Keach is true, she replied tentatively, handing me the 2 documents. The first document was a completely clean STD report, while the second was the signed and notarized divorce understanding document I had given her 7 weeks prior. While the wait had been agonizing for her, it was equally uncomfortable for me, especially with her tempting physique constantly present at home during that time. I grinned, securing the documents in my briefcase before locking it. Then, I kissed her passionately, lifting her up and carrying her to the master bedroom where we indulged in intense lovemaking. She experienced multiple orgasms before I even penetrated her, eagerly preparing her for pleasure. My arousal was so intense that it was almost painful. As I climaxed inside her and removed the butt plug simultaneously, she drifted into a state of bliss, and I was not far behind. When we both regained our senses, I gently roused her and we talked about the incredible experience, avoiding any mention of Jack Whitney. For the remainder of the weekend until the kids returned on Sunday evening, we primarily focused on eating, sparingly, sleeping, little, conversing, a lot, showering, as needed, always together, and engaging in passionate lovemaking, more than half of our time together. Well, I suppose that's 5 activities, but my mind was too foggy to keep track accurately. Tanya seemed slightly disappointed when I declined to share a room with her every night. I reassured her that we could reconsider once the divorce was finalized. Despite this, she was remarkably accommodating, and although we ended up sharing a bed 3 to 4 nights a week, we continued to sleep separately. The divorce proceeded smoothly with no objections from Tanya. We agreed on her finding a part-time job, and I acknowledged her extended childcare contributions in our financial arrangements. We settled on a 75 to 25 split of expenses with clear delineation of responsibilities, maintaining separate financial circumstances. After the divorce was finalized, there were 2 things I needed to confirm to assess my future with Tanya. Firstly, I contacted Sally to inform her of my divorce, recalling that hers had been finalized a few weeks prior. "Hi, Sally, just letting you know my divorce is official," I said cheerfully. "Did you go through with the cohabitation plan, Jim?" she chuckled. "Yes, I did, and I'm hopeful it'll work out. But I need to investigate something before I can say for sure," I replied with determination. "Oh, really? What's on your mind?" she inquired. "I want to see if Tanya truly lives up to her reputation as the best lover ever," I chuckled. "Well, Jimmy, you've come to the right person. We bonded quite well during our operation, didn't we?" she remarked cheerfully. "Yes, we did. I'd like to give you a shot, Sally, no strings attached, just some good old-fashioned fun," I replied. "You're quite straightforward, aren't you?" "Hey, Sally, no beating around the bush for me," I said seriously, before bursting into laughter that nearly caused me to drop the phone. "Well, just so you know, I'm shaved, except for a landing strip," she giggled. "Sounds delicious," I replied sincerely. We arranged to meet at a resort halfway between our homes for a long weekend, intending to move past the unpleasantness of our past betrayals without expecting a lasting relationship. I made sure Tanya could handle the kids that weekend, leaving Sally as the only caveat. Sally's daughter would be away at a pre-college camp. The morning after a night of passionate sex and conversation, I broached the topic with Tanya over breakfast. "Hey, Tanya," I began casually. "I'll be away from Friday morning to Sunday afternoon on the 21st. Can you handle the kids or maybe get your sister to help out?" "Where are you going?" she asked, her lower lip quivering slightly. "I'll be at that new resort near Atchison, meeting Sally Whitney," I replied nonchalantly. "Why are you meeting her?" Tanya inquired, struggling to maintain composure. "We both have unresolved issues from our divorces, so we're going to talk about them. If you have other plans, I can arrange for a sitter," I explained calmly. After a pause, Tanya replied, "No, Jim, that won't be necessary. I'm happy to take care of the kids that weekend, and I'll ask my sister for help if needed." We didn't discuss it further. Over the next 2 weeks, Tanya made extra efforts to be affectionate, seemingly trying to change my mind. However, I politely declined intimacy on Thursday night, claiming fatigue as I prepared for the weekend. Tanya appeared cheerful as I left on the morning of the 21st, even wishing me a good time, though her insincerity was evident. However, as I stepped away from the door, I heard her crying, which oddly made me feel somewhat relieved. It confirmed the second thing I was curious about, her true feelings for me. The weekend with Sally was enjoyable and straightforward. We indulged in sex and companionship without any pretense. Sally's physical flexibility and strength surprised me, and her honesty was refreshing. Despite her tough exterior, she confessed that Jack's affair had deeply wounded her emotionally. After an intense moment of intimacy, Sally shared her insecurities with me, feeling inadequate as a woman due to Jack's affair. I reassured her of her desirability and proceeded to focus on pleasuring her. We both understood that our relationship was confined to that weekend, with no expectations beyond that. As I dropped her off at her private plane on Sunday, she jokingly asked about Tanya's status as my best sexual experience. Reflecting on our weekend together, I humorously acknowledged the 9 memorable encounters we shared. I then honestly admitted that while Sally was an exceptional lover, Tanya held a slight edge for me personally. She was probably a 9.7 or 9.8, but why quibble? Sally's face lit up with an enormous smile. "You're telling the truth, aren't you?" Absolutely, I nearly shouted. Do you think I could fake that level of satisfaction? No way, she chuckled. You're not that good of an actor. Well, thank you, Jim Gage. That's very flattering and confirms your cohabitation decision, doesn't it? Yes, it does, but honestly, I think I could be just as happy with you as I will be with Tanya, especially since I wouldn't have to worry about you cheating. You're right about that, Sally giggled. Thank you for one of the most fun, stimulating, and exhausting times of my life. You have no idea what this weekend has done for my ego and sexuality. Then, the physically strongest woman I've ever known started to softly cry. Wow. I thought to myself once again. Jack really did hurt her. I held Sally in my arms for a good 5 minutes while she gradually stopped sobbing. Eventually, she pulled away, wiped a tear, gave me another kiss, and left. As she walked away, I spun the car around behind her, rolled down my window, and said, "You're beyond awesome." She turned, smiled, and boarded her plane. Feeling content, I drove home. I had fantastic sex with an amazing partner, helped her emotionally, and reaffirmed that Tanya was likely the best sex partner for me. When I arrived home, the kids were happy to see me, and Tanya was particularly pleasant and friendly. After a wonderful 2-hour discussion after the kids went to bed, she simply gave me a kiss and said, "Good night, darling." Although Tanya and I were getting along better than ever, I had the urge for one more test. Maybe it was revenge or a desire to reaffirm her status, but I convinced myself it was just to confirm her position as the best partner. I met Marcia through work, and she was the only woman I'd seen who was hotter than Tanya. After 4 dates, including an intense night together, I realized I would never find someone as satisfying as Tanya. Ending things with Marcia was straightforward. On our 5th date, I disclosed my living arrangements, wanting to be transparent with such an awesome woman. She was shocked and bewildered. "You and your ex-wife live in the same house, raise your kids together, and have sex?" she gasped. "Yes, but we rarely have sex more than 4 times a week," I replied, trying to appear innocent. "You pervert," she screamed as she flung the car door open. "Don't call me again." Then she slammed the door and stormed off. In a serious tone, I yelled out, "Sorry." When I came home early from my 5th date with Marcia, Tanya was visibly excited. That night, she indulged me in one of my favorite positions, the wheelbarrow. The next morning, before the kids woke up, I asked her to move back into the master bedroom with me. Tears of joy streamed down her face as she soaked my shoulder and pillow. A month after Tanya moved back into the master bedroom, and all her clothes were returned to their original places, and she took over the master bathroom, she sweetly asked, "Honey, do you mind if I start wearing my wedding rings again?" I gave her a puzzled look, and she quickly explained, "I know we're not married, and I wouldn't tell anyone we mutually know that I was, but you see, I get hit on by guys constantly, not just at work, but whenever I go out." I nodded in understanding. "What if you find someone you're interested in?" I asked seriously. Tanya started to sob. "I'm only interested in you. I gave up the right to claim you exclusively, but I couldn't have less interest in anyone else." I held her as she cried, then lifted her head and said, "Okay, I'll make you a deal. We'll both be exclusive unless we tell the other that we're not going to be. If you agree to that, I don't object to you wearing your rings again." Tears of joy flowed as she vigorously showed her agreement. Unfortunately, our moment was interrupted when we heard Susan, our youngest, clomping down the hall in her make-believe high heels, signaling the need to cool it. That morning was 3 years ago. Since then, I've been as sexually fulfilled and happy as a man could be. My kids are great, and Tanya does everything imaginable to please me without being a sycophant. We have our disagreements but always resolve them respectfully before falling asleep. Tonight, Tanya introduced a new element. After a fabulous session and pillow talk, just before Tanya rolled over to sleep, she kissed me and said, "Jim, you can have no doubt that I love you with all my heart. But by the time Susan turns 18, if you haven't asked me to marry you again, we're splitting up." My immediate thought was, Susan just turned 8, so I have 10 more years of great sex and good companionship before I have to find something else. I'll be sure to make the best of it. I went to sleep with a smile on my face. Thanks for watching and have a great day. Write your opinion in the comments.